Hi, I'm just testing for the 3 p.m. broadcast, and I'll be going live in a few minutes. I don't know if the audio is working. Um, Testing because I can't necessarily hear myself. Um, so this test isn't much good to me right now. Anyway, I'm going to finish this and come back. Oh, yeah. Can you folks hear me? This is just a preview for the 3 o'clock. I'll be starting at 3, but I'm just testing. And can you indicate if you can hear me? Agop, Talk, Dwight, Nilufar. Can someone indicate if you can hear me? Hello? Can you hear me? No one seems to be able to hear me. Goodness. Can anyone hear me? Hello? Oh, you can hear me. Oh, Amy, you can hear me. Oh, great. Okay. Well, I suppose we could start a little early. I'm not supposed to start for about 13 minutes. This is just kind of a pre-meeting test. But if someone wants to shoot a question in my direction, we can start a little bit early today because there's a whole bunch of you there, including Richard Agan. Hi, Richard. I haven't heard from you since the last time I emailed me. You had given me some comment about self and self-esteem from Albert Ellis, and I loved what you were writing about. I find myself in agreement with so many of Albert Ellis's ideas and thoughts and so forth. So it's good to see you again, Richard. And I see Maureen O'Sullivan says yes, you can hear me. And Evan Ream, thank you. And Bill Thomas and Amy Simpson Hoyle, thank you. And Philippe Goulet. And think up your questions. I have a few questions to get us started today, but also would like to know, what you like and dislike about the podcast, because I'm trying to think of some way to make them more interactive, more dramatic, more fun for folks. And we're looking into a little bit whether I could have a setup where I could have two people here who could actually talk simultaneously and role play, and also whether I could role play with some of you or get you on the screen. Hi, Barb from Pennsylvania, Barb Full, and Marcello, Martin Allegra, Bill Thomas, Sarah Flores, Lolita Erguisa. It's fun to see so many of you. I could try to put someone on the screen if someone volunteered. Someone said if I hit the name or the picture of someone, they'll appear with me. I don't know if their sound will appear or not, but I could try it as an experiment if someone wants to volunteer. I don't want to put someone on split screen with me without your permission. But if someone wants to volunteer just for a little 1-minute experiment, and if you have a microphone or earphones or something, then I'll see if you can be heard. Or maybe it needs to be set up more carefully. But again, I don't want to click on your picture without your permission. There's Phil. Oh yes, hi, Dr. David. I hear you're not into antidepressant medications. That's true, and if you want me to comment on antidepressant medications, you may have all heard my thoughts about them. So what some of the latest research seems to be showing, but I won't go into that unless someone wants. And there you are, Lisa. Lisa, should I try putting you on the screen with me and see if the split screen works? I'm looking for a volunteer to test it here before our official opening at 3 o'clock. Can I click on you, Lisa, and see if you appear on the screen? Well, here's Sarah Adam. Here's, well, that's Sarah again, Lisa. So I clicked on Lisa and nothing nothing happened. So that split screen thing doesn't seem. Oh, Lisa says, no, I look terrible. Oh, I look terrible too. I just finished our hike. We went on our hike today. It's kind of a little cooler here in Northern California. I guess the fires are burning in the south. And oh, hi, Orly Marmer. Good to see you, Orly. And Josephine Perez and Fabiola Sanchez Ruiz and Sarah Adam. Thank you all for joining. Oh, click on me if you like. Okay. Sarah, I'm clicking on you. It says, you haven't finished your post. Do you want to leave without finishing? No, I'm going to stay on this page. I think that feature, we must not have it turned on correctly. But at any rate, we went on our hike. We went a little over 7 miles, and we hiked about 112 flights of stairs, too. And we had a wonderful hike, and we worked on several issues. We did, 2 people worked on relationship issues, which seems really popular with our hikers. One, someone whose boyfriend is giving her kind of the runaround, and we worked on that. That's my favorite topic, actually, is teaching women how to turn the tables on men who are giving them the runaround, and so that was very worthwhile. And another had an intimacy problem where a young woman and her boyfriend aren't really sharing feelings with each other. They kind of get anxious and then talk about the anxiety without really dealing with how they're feeling, and that was very good. And then another one of our hikers was sadly had his house broken into and smashed up when he was visiting family in the East, and he was notified when he was still on the East Coast that his house had been broken into and some things stolen and some things smashed, and he was in a state of tremendous anxiety and anger and vulnerability, and so we worked that through as well. And he was just a delight to work with, even though he started out, pretty with all of the emotions up off the chart, 75 to 95% depressed and angry and anxious and ashamed and vulnerable and all of these feelings. And then by the end, he'd really just knocked the ball out of the park and was feeling tremendous. And it just gives me a lot of gratification to have therapeutic techniques that can work really rapidly and really effectively, even for people who have had real negative events. And what more terrible than to discover someone has broken into your house and smashed up your house with a baseball bat? It's terrifying and hard to understand what was going on. But I have a few questions here. I might as well dive in. And remember, type in your questions if you have some questions you want me to address, because I just love it when you shoot questions. And also, if you want to email me, david@feelinggood.com, with ideas on what you'd like to see in this Sunday podcast, and what are some things we could do to make it kind of more dramatic and fun and exciting for you. I could have certain topics each week, but I think the thing that would make it really good is if I can figure out a way to have two-way communication with you, so you folks can talk and we can role play, and I can have maybe live guests. Like next week, Fabrice from the Feeling Good podcast is going to be my guest, because we're going to be recording a number of podcasts here at my house next Sunday afternoon, and I'll pause and do the 3 p.m. podcast, and he'll join in just kind of to say hello to everyone. But anyway, here's a good question from Michelle, and I don't know if Michelle's with us, but she's talking about the Feeling Good podcast, actually. She says, I can't thank you enough for your work in this podcast. Combined with a good therapist, I was able to totally knock out a lifetime of depression in a few sessions, as well as completely flip my unhealthy and very unhappy relationship. And she said she and her partner were in the process of calling divorce lawyers and turned it into a growing relationship within days. And she said, I read your Feeling Good Together book. In 2 days, I could prevent one of us moving out. And so thank you for sharing that. It's unusual that someone can learn to use the techniques in the Feeling Good Together book so quickly. It requires a lot of humility and death of the ego. So kudos to you on that tremendous accomplishment. And then she goes on to ask about what would be the approach to helping family members or friends who suffer from bipolar disorder. That's most of you know, but if some of you don't know, bipolar disorder is manic depressive illness, and in its full-blown form, it's called bipolar 1, and that's where individuals go into actually temporary psychotic states where they're thinking that they're have some fantastic energy and some fantastic vision, some fabulous things are going to happen, and they kind of lose perspective. Like a man was referred to me with bipolar disorder, and he was actually on disability, and he was receiving something like $700 a month disability. So he figured in a manic state that he could spend $600 a month on a new high-speed Porsche, the monthly payments. He just wasn't thinking rationally. So he bought this Porsche, and then he was driving down the freeway at 100 miles an hour and was arrested by the police and hospitalized for a full-blown manic episode. Another fellow during an episode of mania developed the sudden conviction that pipes, like you buy in a tobacco shop, rare pipes would be a wonderful investment, and in a state of mania, he went around, just to disguise it, let's say San Francisco, buying thousands and thousands of dollars of pipes at tobacco shops and this type of thing, and then when the person comes down from the high, they're generally pretty shocked. And the thing about bipolar disorder, it is a biological disorder. It's not just a variant on normal happiness. It's something more on a plane of psychosis. The person with mania has little need for sleep. They talk rapidly. They have flight of ideas. They're generally in a state of euphoria, sometimes anger, but usually euphoria, and they have grandiose thoughts. And the thing about it, it's a complete change in personality from the way they ordinarily are. And then when they come down, get off of that, then they're generally back to normal. I've treated large numbers of patients with bipolar disorder, and many of them do need some medication, such as lithium, to stabilize the flights into mania and the flights into depression, and the lithium can help somewhat. But in addition, a relationship with a therapist you really trust and like is important, because I had my patients make a list of the things that will tip them off that they're going into a manic episode, so that they can let me know before the episode goes out of hand. Like one fellow would know that he was going to get manic because he would start smoking, which you ordinarily didn't smoke. He'd start drinking a lot and start going out and womanizing and this type of thing. And that meant that he was ushering in a manic episode. Then he'd contact me and let me know, and then I would increase the dose of lithium and add some other sedative agent like Mellaril or Thorazine to cool him down so he wouldn't have to be hospitalized. But the psychotherapy I found also to be tremendously important and helpful for bipolar individuals, and a lot of them that I treated actually had tremendous careers because their drive, their mania, their hypomania, and their ambition drove them, many of them, to great achievement. But when they learned to develop unconditional self-esteem, it seemed helpful. A lot of them were perfectionistic, thinking, I've got to be so great to be loved. I've got to be so great to be a worthwhile human being, and that led to just a relentless drive for achievement. And there's nothing wrong with having a drive for achievement or wanting to do a good job or wanting to do a great job, but it can become a kind of obsession that in many cases had taken over their lives, and learning that they can be lovable, worthwhile, is just as a flawed human being was very freeing for many of them. And so that would be an answer to that question, that for bipolar, at least for bipolar 1, the full-blown manic depressive illness, meds are usually a crucial part, but the psychotherapy is an important part too. And I would also say that the prognosis was excellent for the individuals with bipolar illness. Once I learned how to do cognitive therapy, my patients did great. They almost never had to be hospitalized, and they led very, very productive lives. Now, Klaus has a question. How would you deal with people who are constantly trying to nitpick over everything, people who criticize you and question everything you say and do? My experience is that defending myself doesn't necessarily work. Well, here's where we would need, that's a great question. Thank you for that, Klaus. The 5 secrets of effective communication are the answer to this question, but that takes a lot of practice. And if we had two-way communication here, I could role play with you and illustrate how it works. Also, if you listen to the Feeling Good podcasts, which are just audio, they're once a week, and you can find them on my website, feelinggood.com. We're just launching a series on the 5 secrets of effective communication, and each week we'll be featuring a different one of the techniques, starting with the disarming technique, then thought and feeling empathy, then inquiry, then I feel statements, and then stroking. And the suggestion will be to try one of those techniques every day, several times with people, so you can learn how to do that one technique. When people are critical and nitpicky, I find that the disarming technique works like a charm, and stroking to find truth in what they're saying, and to praise them, and feeling empathy, to acknowledge how they're feeling. That quiets them down if done skillfully, pretty much 100% of the time. If not done skillfully, it won't be effective. It'll backfire. But that intellectually is the answer. And as I say, maybe Fabrice and I can try to role play that on the Feeling Good podcast and illustrate exactly how that works. But you're right, defending yourself will almost, from any kind of criticism, will almost never be effective. Using the 5 secrets of effective communication, like the disarming technique and finding truth in the criticism, also can be painful, because it requires the death of the ego and seeing things through the eyes of the other person, and that can be very, very challenging. David Mitchell, hi David, who's been to at least one intensive, if not 2 intensives. And good to see you here, David. And you're saying, Dr. Burns, do you normally pass out psychoeducation to your clients and patients in relation to their disorders? Well, I do. That's actually, David, why I write books like Feeling Good, the Feeling Good Handbook, When Panic Attacks, Feeling Good Together. That is the psychoeducation that I use. And when I have written my books like Feeling Good or the Feeling Good Handbook, but the idea is the patients can read chapters for homework between sessions and get all the basics, like what is a self-defeating belief, what are the 10 cognitive distortions, what are some strategies for defeating these painful negative thoughts, and then I can individualize the therapy for them during the actual session, so I don't have to keep teaching the same thing over and over again. I think psychoeducation has an important role in life and in therapy, but it is not therapy. It just some of the educational concepts that will facilitate the therapy. This is Day Jessica, and she says, ADD and loving it. A documentary states that ADD gets confused with bipolar. Do you agree? That could be confusing for some people, Day, I suppose, but to be honest with you, I have never confused bipolar manic depressive illness, which is extremely distinct. Once you've seen a number of people with bipolar illness, it's very unusual and very distinct and quite different from ADD. But some people are not crisp in their thinking about diagnoses, and there's a lot of overlap between diagnoses. It's not a pure science, and there's tremendous problems with the DSM. So it could be confusing to some people. Another potential area for confusion is that attention deficit disorder or hyperactivity disorder frequently gets treated with street drugs such as Dexedrine, which is actually sold by drug companies and called Adderall, but it's just Dexedrine. There's three stimulants: Benzedrine, Dexedrine, and Methadrine. Methadrine is the most powerful. That's the one where you see these people addicted to intravenous Methadrine and becoming paranoid and violent. It's a horribly destructive drug, causes brain damage. And also the Methadrine addicts, when you see them, like on TV and documentaries, they look like premature aging. It just seems to have a total deteriorating effect on the body. Well, that's similar to what we're treating young people with so-called attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, Adderall or Dexedrine, and it is performance enhancing. It will make you high and stimulate you. Taken in large doses, it will create a manic state of mania. If you just take a lot of speed, you will, or Methadrine or Dexedrine or Adderall, whatever you want to call it, if you take a substantially large dose, you will become temporarily extremely manic. And but the confusion there is the drug-induced state. It's not the ADD then that would be confused with mania, but it would be the effect of an overdose of the so-called medication. Now, Shalan says, I've just started reading When Panic Attacks. Nothing specific triggers my anxiety, but the fear of actually having an attack. How can I work on fixing that? In chapter 3, I mean, I think reading the whole book will give you a pretty good orientation to panic attacks and anxiety in general, and the 4 models that I use for treating anxiety. But the cognitive and exposure model would be, and again, I'm feeling handicapped, and I apologize to you that we don't have a two-way dialogue available on this thing yet. But I would be asking you, why are you afraid of having a panic attack? What's the worst that could happen? What are you the most afraid of? And most people with panic attacks are afraid of dying, of a heart attack or a stroke, or the throat closing off and choking to death, being unable to breathe. That's one of the most common fears. Another one of the most common fears people have of a panic attack is during the panic attack, they think they're going to go crazy, so they're terrified of that. Other people have the fear that they're going to lose control in public and pee in your pants. We've seen people with that phobia, or lose control of your bowels and poo in your pants. These are some of the common fears. And so people with panic attacks, sometimes they're afraid of going out in public, afraid to go to the grocery store because I'm going to have a panic attack, I'm going to go crazy, and there will be no one there to help me. And if you can pinpoint, what you're the most afraid of, then I generally have the patient do an experiment to test that fear. Like I've had many people, if you're afraid that you're going to go crazy during a panic attack, I've said to patients, what do you think would happen if you went crazy right now in my office? What would it look like? What are you the most afraid of? And then they say, I'd be rolling around on the floor, talking in tongues, screaming, babbling incoherently, something like that. And then I say, well, why don't you do that? See if you can drive yourself crazy. And typically the patient says, "Oh no, that's terrifying. I'm too afraid." And then I really push the patient. Sometimes I'll demonstrate it myself. I'll get on the floor and start screaming and rolling around, and then get them to do that. And then when they discover they can't drive themselves crazy, no matter how hard they try, it's often an immediate and semi-permanent or permanent cure for the panic disorder. So that's one of the important techniques, and that would be a cognitive technique, like seeing what is the thought that's triggering you. What are you the most afraid of if you had a panic attack? Why is that so terrible? What's the worst that would happen? And then the patient might say, "Oh, I might lose control in public and make a fool of myself." And then I might actually then go out with the patient in public and do what we call shame attacking exercises. Let's just make a fool of ourselves out here in public. I take the students from our Tuesday group at Stanford from time to time over to the Stanford Mall to do shame attacking exercises, because I think it's unethical to ask your patients to do something that you yourself would be afraid to do. So if you're going to ask your patients to do something extreme like a shame attacking exercise, then you better be willing to do it. And I hope I'm not repeating myself, but hi, Jeremy. Good to see you. I haven't talked to you for a long time, Jeremy. We have some catching up to do, I think. But we had about 30 in the therapists in the Tuesday group. We went over to the Stanford Mall, and we gave each other assignments to do shame attacking exercises to get over our fear of making a fool of ourselves. So they told me that I had to go into Victoria's Secret and ask for a bra in my size. And it was very difficult. And I just forced myself to do that. And I went in there and said, "Do you think I could get a bra in my size?" And the woman looked totally non-befuddled. She said, "No, I don't think we carry your size, but you might try the Macy's men's department." So I said, "Great, I'm going to go over there right now." And I got out of there, but I completed my shame attacking exercise. And then we went into Macy's. I had about 3 or 4 in my group, because I broke everyone into small groups so there wouldn't be a huge mob of us all together doing shame attacking exercises. And we went in there was this rock music playing, and then I saw someone from our Tuesday group, this psychiatrist named Manu, just real handsome, buff guy from India. He's very serious. And he came twirling down the aisle, this rock music playing in Macy's. And he was wearing a purple dress he had tried on, and he was dancing in the aisle. I guess that was his shame attacking exercise. And then Jacob Towery, who's one of the teachers now that teaches my Tuesday Stanford group. He's teaches with me at Stanford. And he's a wild guy and a really nice guy. And he suddenly came waltzing up to the cash register arm in arm with a mannequin that he'd picked up, but it was just a styrofoam mannequin from the waist down to the feet. And it had these real expensive Levi's. And he said to the man at the cash register, I think I'm in love. And I can't go home without this mannequin. You've got to sell her to me. But I've only got $21, but you've got to sell her to me. And then the poor guy at the cash register said, that's a mannequin. We don't sell mannequins. And the Levi's themselves are $79. And Jacob said, I don't care. I don't care what you say. You got to sell me her. I've only got $21. I can't live without her. Crazy things like that. And you discover, if your fear is making a fool of yourself, that when you make a fool of yourself, the world does not come to an end. And it's for people who were shy or socially anxious or, panicked about making a fool of yourself in public. It's just kind of a transformative experience. But it all depends at any rate, Shallan, or what it is that you're afraid of, what is your worst fear, and then one can figure out a way to confront that fear. One other thing I would say is that you want to read in my book, When Panic Attacks, about the hidden emotion model too, because 80% of the time people who are having panic attacks are upset about something in your life that you're not owning up to, something you're sweeping under the rug. Maybe there's someone you're angry with, or some conflict about what you want to do in life, or often there's something eating away at you that you're not expressing because you're overly nice. And almost all people with panic disorder or any form of anxiety are excessively nice. And there's nothing wrong with being nice, but you can be too nice to where you can't deal with problems with other people because you're afraid of hurting their feelings, or because you're not even aware that you're angry with them or upset about something. And bringing those hidden conflicts to conscious awareness and expressing them often can be a life-transforming experience that also will eliminate the symptoms of frequently of anxiety. So there's tremendous numbers of tools. There's 40 techniques in the book for defeating every conceivable kind of anxiety. And then Tiffany Nicole Corrales, what do you say to a patient that has constant feelings of worthlessness? Well, Tiffany, thank you for that. And you know, that this is probably the thing I dealt with the most in my entire career, because I treated mainly patients with depression and anxiety, and I would say probably more than 90% of patients with depression feel worthless or inferior or defective or inadequate. We dealt with that on today's hike, for example, and I love dealing with this problem. If you read one of my books on this topic, like Feeling Good, the New Mood Therapy, or the Feeling Good Handbook, or 10 Days to Self-Esteem, you'll see in all of those that I focus on, let's take one moment when you were feeling worthless. Where was it? What time of day? What day of the week was it? Where were you? And then what was the event that was triggering at that time these feelings of worthlessness? Like it might have been for on a recent hike, someone felt worthless when this person was rejected by his or her partner, just to keep it confidential, and then had loved this person and now was rejected and saying I must be worthless. I treated a woman live in a workshop, and we'll be showing excerpts, video excerpts at the Evolution of Psychotherapy conference next week in Anaheim. I'm going to be giving 5 presentations there, including a 3-hour workshop on team therapy. And this was a woman who had been beaten and raped for 3 decades by a kind of sociopathic husband. And although she finally got divorced and was now out of that marriage, she was still feeling incredibly anxious, incredibly ashamed, and defective and worthless. And she was telling herself, I victimized myself. I shouldn't have let this happen. He must have seen that I was defective. That's why he beat me. That's why he abused me. I must be defective. Things like that. So I write down the negative thoughts that create that feeling of worthlessness, and then you also identify all of your feelings on the daily mood log. You'll find examples of it in all of my books. And you might be feeling depressed, 90, ashamed, 100, worthless and defective, 90 or 100, hopeless, frustrated, angry, discouraged, all these feelings. You write down your negative thoughts. And then you identify the distortions in those thoughts, like all or nothing thinking, looking at yourself in black and white categories, overgeneralization, generalizing from a specific event, such as my boyfriend rejected me, to yourself. Therefore, I have this self that's worthless. So you're not focusing on a real event. You're doing this generalized thinking, kind of an abstract level of thinking about your life, rather than saying, how can I make my next relationship better? What errors did I make in relating to him? And what's the best way to find a guy who would be better for me? How can I overcome the fear of being alone? Here's some specific things. You're just saying, I'm worthless. You may be doing discounting the positive and mental filter, thinking about all of your flaws and overlooking or discounting the parts of you that are beautiful, that are positive. There's probably some fortune telling, predicting I'm worthless, I'm doomed, I'll be unhappy forever, things will never change. That would be fortune telling. It could be emotional reasoning. I feel worthless. I feel like a loser, therefore I must be a loser. I must be worthless because I feel worthless. It's a hidden should statement. I shouldn't be worthless. I shouldn't make mistakes. I should be better than I am. I shouldn't be feeling this way, for example. And it's definitely self-blame, beating up on yourself. And then once you've identified those distortions, I describe tons of strategies in my books for defeating thoughts like that. Like the double standard technique would be, suppose you had a dear friend, just like you, with all the same problems, all the same strengths. What would you say to that person? Clearly you're worthless. And you might, and if so, then this technique is not going to work. You have to try another technique. But if you say to yourself, no, I wouldn't say that to a dear friend, and say, well, why not? What would you say to a dear friend? Would you be willing to talk to yourself in the same compassionate way you would talk to someone you loved who was suffering? And that's just one of 50 or 100 techniques you can use to crush the kinds of thoughts that cause feelings of worthlessness. So there's many other techniques: the acceptance paradox, externalization of voices, the downward arrow technique, examine the evidence, on and on and on. Let's see what else we've got here. Dr. Burns, do you think that therapy has reached a hiatus? This is another good David Mitchell question. Basically repeating itself with the same therapeutic techniques, but renaming them and repackaging them differently. Well, I think there's an awful lot of that goes on, and I don't like it, to tell you the truth. That one of the things I loved about Albert Ellis is he didn't steal from other people. He was a great innovator, but he also borrowed a lot from the greats of the past, Karen Horney, for example, and many others. And he had plenty of his own actual original techniques as well. But I've seen that an awful lot of people in our field will take techniques, often, and I'm probably paranoid on this, but I have a list of my 50 most common, my 50 best techniques. Many of them I've learned from others, and I always acknowledge that. I'm always happy to acknowledge others who have created a particular method, like exposure. I didn't create that. That went back to the Buddha 2,500 years ago, into early ancient Buddhism, as well as many techniques that I've created that are clearly my own. And when I used to go to Beck's seminars, and I would create a new technique, like I can remember the day I created the technique called externalization of voices and the acceptance paradox, and I presented it in the weekly seminar, and they gave me a memo saying, this is to verify that you have created this entirely new technique on this day, and it is your own. But I was at a trauma conference in Canada where I was fortunate to present a keynote address just last week, and I decided to sit in on one of the other speakers, and I found her promoting my ideas under her own name with her own techniques, and she didn't acknowledge that I had created that technique, and she was calling it her own therapy. Voice therapy, I think, is what she was calling it, and using it for troubled relationships. And I've often thought, why do you do that? Why do you take someone else's techniques and just call them your own and repackage things? And that's what a lot of our field consists of. But no, I don't think that's all that happens, because every single week in my Tuesday group, we've got wonderfully creative people. We create new techniques pretty much every week, new treatment techniques, new training techniques, and they're entirely new, entirely unique. But at the same time, there are certain basic insights that people who have achieved greatness in our field have kind of stumbled across, and sometimes people stumble across the same dimension or insight or approach independently and kind of give it their own name and their own twist. So some of this is definitely forgivable, but I think there's a lot of stealing. I have found, I won't tell you the names of the people, but I've found lists of my 10 cognitive distortions, which I created. I can remember the day I created the list of cognitive distortions. I learned about 5 of them from Beck. I learned 1 of them from Ellis. I created about 3, and I created this list of 10 distortions, and that's what gave rise to my book, Feeling Good: The New Mood Therapy. And I bet that list of cognitive distortions has appeared maybe over 1 million times on the internet. But I've seen it reproduced in other people's books, some of them very recognizable, famous mental health professionals with the name, with their copyright at the bottom. They stole it right out of my book, Feeling Good, put it in their book, and put their name on it as if they had created it. And I don't see any need to be stealing other people's ideas like that. I think it's shameful and offensive to me. Here's somebody asking about something I probably can't answer because it's not my expertise, but I'll read it because it's an interesting question. Hello, Dr. Burns. I'm submitting this message in regard to a 12-year-old male adolescent who presents with symptoms of dissociative identity disorder. For those of you who don't know, that's people with like multiple personality disorder. He currently presents with 4 distinct personalities. As of today's date, all medical professionals have, recused themselves from his case. I believe his case is severe and few know how to treat. Again, he's 12. Oh, poor guy. While his case is severe, it's so interesting. I know this is a huge question, but what would you do if you were his parent? He resides in Florida and his parents are willing to travel and do anything, and thank you. Well, I don't have expertise, Julie, in working with children or working with multiple personality disorder. I will say, if I have minimum credibility, I did once supervise a psychoanalyst who treated exclusively patients with multiple personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. And I supervised him via telephone for about 10 weeks in a row. He would call me once a week for an hour or something like that and go over his cases. And what I helped him with, and what he said was career changing for him, was the idea of making his patients accountable. Like I suggested to him, whatever personality came to him had to do psychotherapy homework and come in with an agenda for the session and be willing to work hard to solve some specific problem. And that if they didn't do that, they weren't allowed to be in therapy. That's how I set up my therapy. It's all about homework assignments and accountability for the patient, and also measuring symptoms at the start and end of every therapy session. And he said that one insight alone transformed his clinical practice with both the patients with borderline personality disorder as well as patients with multiple identity disorder. Now, someone here has the same question as, Tiffany said she had the same question about Maureen as Tiffany about worthlessness. Those of you who are interested in the problem of worthlessness, I'll be writing about that a lot in my new book, Feeling Great. I've done a lot of the writing already and be working on 2 dimensions of that question. I earlier talked about some of the cognitive distortions involved in feeling worthless, but the new dimension in team therapy is what does your worthlessness show about you that's beautiful and awesome, and what does your self-criticism show about you that's really positive, and what are some of the benefits of that. And what, just to make a long story short, in team therapy, what we've discovered is that if we've learned how to make patients proud of your symptoms, proud of your resistance, rather than thinking you're broken and shameful, and have to somehow overcome some chemical imbalance in your brain or some abnormality in your personality. After all, if you're feeling worthless, you're probably being self-critical, and you're probably being honest about the fact that you have many flaws rather than denying it. There's a certain humility in that, and on and on and on. I can only bring this to full flowering if I know the person and the exact situation and the exact feelings and the exact negative thoughts. But it's been mind-blowing to me and to my colleagues that when you do what we call paradoxical agenda setting or positive reframing, we take on the role of the patient's subconscious resistance and try to show the patient how beautiful the so-called negative symptoms are, what it says about them that's awesome and positive, and this seems to melt away resistance. And then when we go into the methods part of the session to clobber the negative thoughts, it's real easy. That's what happened on the hike today with the fellow whose house had been broken into and robbed, and he had like 12 different negative feelings and a dozen self-critical thoughts. And when we did the positive reframing and showed him how awesome it was, the way he was feeling, all of his symptoms, what it showed about him, that was beautiful and awesome and positive, it just kind of blew his mind. And then when we went in to challenge his negative thoughts, it took about 3 or 4 minutes for him to, what I would say, completely recover. His recovery actually happened in about a 30-second period. And I'm glad that 2 of the Stanford psychiatric residents were there too, because they were able to observe someone for the first time recovering in like about 30 seconds. I mean, it took us maybe an hour to work up to that 30-second period where the recovery suddenly happened. But it's so different from the traditional model we're taught in psychiatric residency training or psychology graduate school, where you're taught that depression takes years to treat. It's very slow, and you need all of these pills and so forth to recover. But in my experience, recovery, it's more like suddenly taking your hand off of a hot stove, and you get immediate relief. Let's see here. And you're doing so good on the questions today. Thank you, all of you. Let me just say that after today's hike, and I thought we'd have a small group. Last week we had 16 or 18, and today we had 8 or 9 or 10 people, which was really cool. And then we went afterwards. We had 2 people in our group today who've been coming on hikes who were raised in Vietnam and were boat people, Jamie and her husband Chong, and Jamie's in our Tuesday group at Stanford, our psychotherapy training group, and they're really neat, beautiful people. And then they took us for the brunch afterwards. We've been going for dim sum, Chinese dim sum feasts, and they took us to a place I'd never been to near San Jose called Saigon Town. And it's this fantastic, beautiful modern era with all of these Vietnamese restaurants and that type of thing. So we had a Vietnamese feast, and then afterwards we went to one of these stores. Most of you may never have had this, but they call them teas or something, but they're not teas. They're like these fantastic drinks you can get. They're not alcoholic, but I had one that was, it was like coconut juice and then kind of like lychee juice in there and ice, in a kind of a real creative, sweet, fantastic drinks. There's nothing like that in America or in Western culture I'm aware of. They're kind of like Slurpees, but it's all like mango juice and natural ingredients. It was really, really fantastic. Here's Paul McCarroll from Belfast in Ireland. Thank you, Paul. You love my work? I love Ireland. Had the chance to visit with one of my students from Dublin, Tony Bates, years ago. And I remember we rented a house, my family and his family, in Ireland on the ocean, and we would get the peat and burn it in the fireplace, and had such a beautiful smell, that peat. What are your views on acceptance and commitment to therapy? It works very well in my life and the clients I work with. I think it has a lot going for it. Coincidentally, I'm giving a talk on ACT next week at the Evolution of Psychotherapy conference, Stephen Hayes is presenting a paper kind of on acceptance and commitment therapy in the new third force movements, I think they're called, or third wave movements in psychotherapy. And I found a lot that I like about Stephen Hayes and his work. One thing that we resonate very well on is the importance of acceptance as one dimension in therapy. It's certainly not new to acceptance and commitment therapy and represents no demarcation from cognitive therapy. The acceptance paradox is one of the first cognitive therapy techniques I created in, around 1975, and to this day it remains one of the most powerful of all the cognitive therapy techniques. And even one of my students reminded me to read a quote from my Feeling Good handbook at the introduction, was that my goal in that book, and I don't have the exact wording, was for my readers not to overcome all of your negative feelings and experience joy, but also to learn to accept yourself as a flawed and vulnerable human being. But I can't take credit for acceptance any more than Stephen Hayes can, because it goes all the way back to to Buddhism, again, 2,500 years ago to the time of Buddha. But there are many methods there. I don't think acceptance and commitment therapy ACT is any important revolution in therapeutic effectiveness. I think it falls short in that it's really no better than cognitive therapy if you look at the outcome studies. And all of the psychotherapies, I think, are falling short because all of them are barely better than placebo, if at all, in the treatment of depression. And antidepressant medications are probably no better than placebo, barely better if at all. And I think it's because all of these treatments are trying to help and fix people, which is a noble cause, but without looking at the important dimension of resistance and motivation. And that's what we've done in team therapy, is introduce powerful resistance busting techniques, acknowledging the fact that all of us human beings are kind of ambivalent about change. On the one hand, we might want to lose weight. On the other hand, we love eating. On the one hand, we want to overcome our depression. On the other hand, maybe it seems appropriate to be depressed given the traumas in my life and the failures that I've had. And so we've addressed that issue with some, I think, elegant, powerful, innovative new techniques. And this seems to have greatly boosted our therapeutic effectiveness. Now, we have to prove it in research, so we can't necessarily make claims until we've demonstrated that with the outcome studies. But at any rate, I think there's a lot of wonderful things about ACT, working with values and the spiritual side of life. Again, that's an important part of the therapy I do, the concepts of death and rebirth and the death of the ego. I think whenever you do great therapy, there's a spiritual dimension to it, and also looking at values and how our suffering actually comes from our core values, I think, are very important pieces of therapy. There are other good points that Stephen Hayes has made. I'll just mention them in passing now. One of them, he's very critical of the DSM, that diagnosing people into these so-called independent brain disorders is for the most part nonsensical. I'm really with him on that. There are tremendous flaws in the DSM, and there's a tremendous political and financial side to the DSM, which is not scientific. There's a lot of exciting new ideas. I kind of thought I was in the wilderness shouting alone, and until I read about some of Stephen Hayes' thinking, I found that we have a lot of similar conclusions about things, and that was delightful for me. Let's see. Yes, Evan Reem here has an excellent question. In order for a thought, or let's say a negative thought, or a positive thought, to have an emotional effect, does it have to be believed? Yes, absolutely. The two things that are necessary for emotional distress is to be giving yourself a negative thought. That's number one. And number two, you have to believe it. And if you have those two things, you'll feel upset. Now, if I give myself at this moment a negative thought, I'm looking out my window and I'm telling myself a lion is going to jump over the fence and smash through this window right now and rip my face off. That's negative, right? But I don't believe it, so it has no effect on me. But if I believed it, I'd be terrified. And the same is true of a positive thought. Let's say somebody gives you a compliment. Hey, you did a great job. I liked your talk at the Evolution Conference. And then I tell myself, oh, he's just saying that to be nice to me. He didn't really like my talk. I blew it. Then that positive compliment will have no effect. It's all how you think about things. And if I tell myself something positive like, oh man, I'm going to get a standing ovation at the Evolution of Psychotherapy Conference next week, it doesn't make me happy because I don't believe it. It could happen. Occasionally I'll get a standing ovation, but it's not common. So you have to believe a positive thought as well in order to have a positive effect on your mood. Let's see. Luz Buena. Hi, Luz. Dr. Burns, I've read your Feeling Good book and listened to most of your podcasts. Thank you for that, which have been very helpful. Is Team CBT courses and literature available in Spanish? Well, no, because it hasn't been written up. The only thing that's been written up so far is my ebook, which you get on my website, Tools.Schools of Therapy. Now, my new popular book, I hope it'll be popular, will probably be published in many languages. Feeling Good has been published in Spanish. The Feeling Good Handbook has been published in Spanish. But all of this new stuff, the team stuff, has just evolved, I would say, in the last 5 to 10 years. And, you know, I haven't been writing except like on my website, all my blogs and stuff like that, and my memos for my teaching group at Stanford. But when my new book comes out, just like Feeling Good has been published all over the world, translated into many, many languages, and hopefully that will be true of the new book as well. And thank you for that. Someone says, I'm using a new depression app from Stanford called Woebot. Were you involved with it? No, sorry, I'm not familiar with that. Are you familiar, Klaus asks, are you familiar with the research on metacognitive therapy by Professor Adam Wells from the University of Manchester? If so, any thoughts? Sorry, no, I'm not familiar with that. I don't do a lot of reading, to be honest. I'm a very slow reader. I've only read a few books in my life. One of the disadvantages, I don't keep up with what other people are thinking, but one of the advantages is what I do is original. I learn from my research, I learn from my patients, I learn from my colleagues, I learn from my teaching, but I'm sure there's a lot of wonderful stuff out there. Lisa Kelly writes, I think I've heard you say in the past that you don't believe in the holiday blues publicized at this time of the year. Is that true? And what do you think about seasonal affective disorder? Does it exist in your opinion, and how to treat it? Well, as you know, Lisa and others, I'm somewhat cynical and skeptical, and so you have to take, what I say with a grain of salt. That allows me to speak from the heart. But when I was in clinical practice, my practice went down around the holiday time pretty much every year. And I've never once, maybe once in my whole career, and that's only a vague memory, have I ever seen anyone who had something called the holiday blues or the Christmas blues. it's just something that media people make up because it sounds good, it sounds right, but I've never seen any evidence for it. And I saw some report on psychiatric emergency rooms actually having a decreased attendance at this time of year rather than the increase you might expect. It irritated me, because when I used to go on book tours for my books, and I would love to do that again, because it was kind of fun, and I think I'd be better at it now, because when I was younger, I had this intense camera phobia that I've gotten over. I'll prove it. See, I can smile for the camera. I'm not afraid anymore. But at any rate, I would go out on these book tours, and they still, helped promote the sale of tremendous numbers of books. But I'd get on a show like AM Boston or something, and be about this time of year, and some blonde, gorgeous woman would get on and say, "Dr. Burns, tell us about the Christmas blues." And I'd feel like saying, "There aren't anything like that, you blah, blah, blah." I'd get real pissed off, and it put me in a bind because I wanted to talk about my book. I didn't want to talk about some stupid Christmas blues thing. And then I'd get down on myself and say, "You're supposed to be the feeling good doctor. You're not supposed to be irritated with this host." So then that would put me in a kind of double bind. But I would stumble through it as best I could. But I've never seen a whole lot of evidence for it, but if anyone is upset at the holidays or any other time of year, I've got fantastic techniques to treat that. Like on today's hike, I treated 3 people who were upset about things in their lives, but not a single one of them had anything about any Christmas blues. 2 of them were upset about conflicts in intimate, loving relationship, and one was concerned about his house being broken into and his furniture and things being bashed up by this violent people who knows who they were. And then what do you think about seasonal affective disorder? Well, again, see, I think our field is trying to medicalize things into these disorders with discrete causes, and I'm not a big one for believing in seasonal affective disorder or light therapy. There may be a little truth to it. I think it's massively overblown. I treated a high school girl who said she had seasonal affective disorder because every fall, she would, when school started up, she'd go into a depression. And then I said, "Well, is there anything that upsets you, about going to high school?" And then it came out that she was very lonely and thought she wasn't one of the popular people and didn't have a lot of boys wanting to date her, and she just felt very lonely. And I said, "Well, how would it work if I showed you how to, wrap boys around your finger and make them chase after you in unlimited numbers? Because I can easily teach you that if you like." She said, "That sounds good. So teach me how to do that." So I taught her how to do that, and took about 3 or 4 weeks, and taught her how to flirt and how to manipulate boys, which you're probably not supposed to do. But I think, young women need to learn how to manipulate guys, otherwise they'll get manipulated. And when you find someone you love, then you can open up and be close and loving. But you've got to learn to play the dating game. And she learned very well. And within 3 or 4 weeks, there were boys chasing after her like crazy. And so she's suddenly one of the most popular girls in her high school. And she said, "Oh, I don't have the winter blues anymore." So, I don't see these things as, this is my point of view. I don't see these things as being very useful or very real or very productive ways of dealing with depression. When I'm working with someone with team CBT, I can usually see pretty much a complete elimination of symptoms in 1-2 hour therapy session. So why would you have to be taking pills or using light therapy or these things that drag on and on for months and months and months or years sometimes when more powerful techniques are available? I don't want to oversell that. Some people are tough. They're not going to respond in a single therapy session. Their problems are more complex or with some biological component. But I'm not overly in love with this seasonal affective disorder, something that like the media loves to pick up on it because it sounds kind of real and cutesy or whatever. Oh, that was Richard, by the way, so asking about the Stanford Wobot thing. Well, email me, Richard, to david@feelinggood.com, and tell me, who's behind it, and if it's doing you any good. That would be useful, or if you're just looking at it, if you think it's sensible or helpful or whatever. Let's see. Let me go down here. And let's see how we're doing here. We just have a few minutes left. Debbie Ann Rose says, hello there, Dr. Burns. This is Debbie. Merry Christmas. Thank you, Debbie. Merry Christmas to you. Barry Alan Ryan asks about energy psychology, such as applied kinesiology with CBT. I have to apologetically say, Barry, what I've seen of these, energy psychology things, it looks kooky to me. Okay, there you have it. I'm probably wrong. I'm probably a skeptic, but it's I don't find it inspiring or terribly credible. But often I'm wrong. David Mitchell again asks, is there a huge difference between CBT and team therapy? Yes. Team is just an extension of CBT. It's kind of like CBT on steroids. It's just a more powerful way of doing all the things that traditional CBT does, but also has, new dimensions like testing at the start and end of every therapy session, much more rigorous empathy training techniques, all these powerful paradoxical agenda setting techniques. And then in the methods part of the session, we're using, many CBT methods, but also some psychodynamic methods, exposure methods, spiritual techniques, role play techniques drawn from over a dozen schools of therapy. Klaus asked, how effective can therapy be with people diagnosed with borderline personality disorder? Team CBT was specifically created for individuals with borderline personality disorder. That's why I started to innovate in the 1980s, because 28% of the people who were referred to my clinic in Philadelphia had severe borderline personality disorder. So we were treating literally hundreds and hundreds of patients with that diagnosis. The important pieces, in my opinion, in the treatment of borderline personality disorder is having really powerful empathy techniques, as well as the agenda setting, the paradoxical agenda setting, making the patient accountable. I published a study in the top psychology journal for clinical research, although I'm not a psychologist, I'm a psychiatrist, but the top journal is Journal of Consulting and Clinical Psychology, a naturalistic study of, 300 or 400 patients treated at my clinic in Philadelphia. And we saw that the recovery from depression was barely different in patients with or without the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. In other words, that meant that while the patients with borderline personality disorder recovered slightly less rapidly than patients without the diagnosis, the difference was very, very small. And I thought that was quite surprising and encouraging too, because it states that the team CBT, we were just calling it CBT in those days, but the CBT and team CBT was really quite effective for individuals with borderline personality disorders. Deb Nordholm, what are your thoughts on online counseling? Well, if you're doing online counseling, like through Skype, like right now, if I could talk with somebody and do therapy, I think it would be just as good as live therapy, to be honest with you. Sadly, there are these laws that you can't practice across state lines, that I'm only licensed to practice in California. So if I was doing online therapy, I'd be limited to that population, and I think that's unfortunate. We have a couple team therapists one in Portland and one in New Mexico, and who are doing online sessions with people all over the world. But I don't think, it is my own point of view, again, for better or for worse, I don't think you have to be in the same room with someone to do effective treatment. Now, there are some issues, of the patients I saw in my practice. I would say 80% of the patients I've treated had suicidal thoughts or urges at times. And so you do have to have a way of intervening if someone is starting to get actively suicidal. And that could be trickier with online, I suppose. So there would be some issues that would have to be thought out a little bit. But on average, I think the quality depends on the quality of the therapist. And you can have a tremendous therapist doing tremendous work online and a crappy therapist seeing people in person and doing crappy therapy. Again, those are just my thoughts, and I'm not the world's greatest expert on all of these. And this is Myra. Good to have something from you, Dr. Burns. I can't quite read that, but thank you for your kind comment. Susan Atwell, for people resistant to traditional CBT and requiring team, are there any similarities that you found with these individuals? Well, yes. I think that the people, and if you look at the controlled outcome studies, with every form of psychotherapy, including CBT, a full 50% of the people do not achieve the goals of therapy in the time of the research study. And it's my belief that those are the people who have more resistance. And again, I don't think resistance is a bad thing. We look at resistance as a good thing, an awesome thing, a beautiful expression of someone's personality and values. But the people who do not rapidly respond to CBT or other forms of psychotherapy, it is my strong belief that it's because their resistance has not been addressed. And when they then come into team and you address the resistance, most of the time you can get a rapid and dramatic reduction or complete elimination of the symptoms of depression and hopelessness. So I think that the common denominator, the similarities here, the missing link, in my opinion, in almost every form of psychotherapy is focus on resistance in a productive way, where you can quickly melt away somebody's resistance. And then Julie Ann Lindeen says, thank you, Dr. Burns. Couple of exclamation points. No, one, I appreciate you. Thank you for that. I appreciate that, Julie. And then, let's see, someone had something about, oh yeah, David said, do you normally pass out psychoeducation to your patients in relation to their disorders? No, I tell them to go buy my books. I don't pass them out for free. That's how I support myself, and I hope you'll do the same. And I think if you can pass out, I mean, I in my therapist toolkit, I have certain psychoeducational memos you can photocopy and send to your patients at the beginning of therapy, the orientation to therapy, the need for homework, what to do if you suddenly decide to drop out of therapy prematurely. So I did mail those when I was in practice to every patient. Then they had to fill out certain memos before the first therapy session. So they what are the administrative requirements and how much time do they have to give me to cancel a session without being charged for it, and patient confidentiality issues, all those things that I sent them before the first session. They had to read them and tick off that they had read them. But the real psychoeducation is the things in my books, like Feeling Good or Feeling Good Together, where the patient can really read between sessions and get a lot of the deeper ideas practiced with the techniques and so forth. Yes, Lisa says, please let David know what you liked and disliked in the broadcast today. What specific suggestions do you have for him so he can better meet your needs? His email is david@feelinggood.com, and feeling good is one word with 2 G's in it. And that would be so useful for me to know. I mean, a lot of you are here right now live for this. You're giving your time. Your time is valuable. My time is valuable. How can we make this a really dynamic experience? I got a feedback from one person that I really took to heart. I get all kinds of feedback, and if I'm slow in getting back to you, I apologize. I am 500 or 600 or 700 emails behind, and it's hard for me to catch up. And I've been preparing for all these, my 5 presentations at the Evolution conference this coming week, but after that I'll be better at catching up. But I really appreciate it. Most of what I get are just good questions or praise. I get tremendous praise. Marilyn Coffey, who was the patient on the live therapy on the Feeling Good podcast, the woman facing stage 4 lung cancer. And if you haven't gone to feelinggood.com and looked at the podcast and look at the Maryland podcast, it will change your life. I mean, it was fantastic what she did by sharing her suffering and the shock at learning she had this diagnosis. And every day I get praise for her, but I get, and for other things, the podcast, the books, and I appreciate that. But I get some criticisms from time to time too. And this week someone said, your Facebook podcasts are kind of boring, and it's not worth my time, and this type of thing. I thought, well, that's a good, that's good feedback. I can see that, because I'm not answering questions that you have. You're just kind of sitting bored while I answer other people's questions. And at the same time, Lisa Kelly is saying, but these podcasts have a real positive value. You connect with people on a human level. They can talk to David. Let's see what we can do to be creative, to turn this into something of the significant for folks. So it's a good use of David's time and a good use of your time. So tell me what you like and dislike. I get feedback in my teaching. I get feedback in my therapy, negative feedback, sometimes stinging negative feedback, often praise, often abundant, joyful praise. And I learn from all of that. And since we don't have a formal way to give David feedback, email me, tell me what you like, tell me what you dislike, and maybe I can report on that next week, and maybe we can learn more about the technology and to see if there would be some opportunities to make the technology a bit more dynamic, two-way, and so forth. And remember, next week you get to meet Fabrice, who's now become a bit of a celebrity because of our Feeling Good podcast. I know in November we were up to 40,000 downloads of our Feeling Good podcasts, and they seem to be growing every month. And also, as far as call to action, if you like these Facebook broadcasts, please you're supposed to like me or like something. And I don't even know, I'm so old and decrepit, I don't even know how this liking thing works, but like me if you're supposed to like me, or like my page, or send to your friends, tell them that this is available. And also to go to and register on my website, feelinggood.com, www.feelinggood.com. And I've got tremendous resources there, the Feeling Good blogs, the Feeling Good podcasts, on and on and on, workshop announcements, and maybe to finish with a wonderful Lisa said, you mean Facebook broadcast, not podcast. Yes, this is a broadcast. We have Feeling Good podcasts on my website, and then this is the Facebook broadcast. They're a little different, but they're both weekly products. But Susan Atwell kindly says, this is an amazing opportunity, ! Your book changed my life 13 years ago. Thank you. Well, thank you for that comment, Susan, and Gabrielle Franta, thank you. John Halblieb. Oh, John says your books have been an amazing help to me. Thank you for that. And if you're a therapist, and if you recommend my books to your patients, Feeling Good Together, Feeling Good Handbook, When Panic Attacks, you put some quarters in my pocket so I can keep doing free things for folks, keep a little income coming in, but it will make your job as a therapist easier your patients will recover more rapidly. So thank you so much. The time has come to say goodbye for another week. Wish me luck at the Evolution Conference, and have a wonderful week, everybody. And thank you, Lisa Kelly, for making this happen, and Tyann. And I can't even remember Tyann's last name now. I'm so elderly. But there's all this great thumbs up going across the screen, and it looks really nice. So thank you, everybody. And I wish you could come and join us on a Sunday hike sometime. Oh, one last announcement. My neighbor, Dave, who comes on the Sunday hikes, is kind of a video and audio expert. It's not his profession, but it was at one time. And he's going to be bringing some actual transmitter microphones on the hikes, lapel microphones that we can broadcast to a receiver, so that when we're hiking, doing personal work or whatever, we'll be getting hopefully broadcast quality audio. And I might be able then, with people's permission, to bring some live work to you through the Feeling Good podcast, for example. So there are exciting things happening. There may be a way for some of you to indirectly join our Sunday hikes. So thank you, everybody. And I'm supposed to like somebody. I say I'm just going to like a bunch of you right now. Lisa told me to do that, and I forgot. So I'm going to like everyone I can on this page who has a like available. So I'm liking Myra. And if I can, what's bouncing around, but Klaus, David, Barry Ann, I don't know what happens when I like you, but it sounds good. Let's see, who else? See, I can't like all of you because you don't all have a little like button underneath, but Evan I'm liking, Luz I'm liking, Klaus I'm liking, and from now on, whenever I see those likes, I'll be clicking them. I didn't realize I was supposed to do that. I'll be like Trump. You can like me, but I won't like you. No, I shouldn't say that. When I say sarcastic things about Trump, I get blasted. I apologize. But let's see. Lisa, I'm going to like you again. Richard Hagan, I'm going to like you. And so I've done. Oh, and Debbie Ann Rose, I'm gonna like you. And well, I'm gonna finish now. Have a good week, everybody. Thank you. Bye bye.